This video demonstrates how an ExcelRT app can interact with controls on a web page using script commands. This is the web page we'll be using, and you see we have various controls. The idea is we want to allow script commands within our app to set checkboxes, radio buttons, make selections, click buttons to perform some type of action, paste data, copy data from a cell, paste it into another cell, or click a link to navigate to a new page. We've added a couple of buttons using in-cell controls across the top of our sheet. We have a button that can show a URL in a window. We can bring that browser window to the front or close it. Let's go ahead and demonstrate how this works. There's the window it brought up. And if we want to bring that window to the front, we'll click this button that runs a command to do that. And we can click this button, which will run a command to close that window. Let's see how those commands work. If we open up the script associated with these buttons, for this particular button, if on cell click of sheet 1, column 2, row 2, then we're going to run this bit of script. So we have this script command that opens the window, gives it this title, presents this URL within the window, and then we have the size of the window that we want to present in terms of horizontal and vertical pixels, the position of the window, and we return a browser ID into a variable. When we click the front button on cell click of sheet 1, column 3, row 2, it runs a couple of script commands. This first command will bring the window to the front identified with that browser ID variable. And we do a second command that just refreshes the contents of the window just in case the page has changed on the server. And finally, the close button runs this command, which closes the window identified with that browser ID. Let's add a command to our ExcelRT app to click on checkbox 1. To do that, we need to see the source code for this page. Most browsers have a command where you can present the source code at the bottom or in a separate panel. In this video, we presented the HTML source code in a separate text editor over here. So this specific element on the page, checkbox 1, is represented by this particular bit of source code. And specifically, in this particular checkbox field, we can see that it has a unique ID called my checkbox 1. We're going to use that in just a moment when we construct a command to set that checkbox. Within our app, we have several commands that we can send to interact with controls. We can click on controls, write some text into the control, copy some text into the clipboard, or paste clipboard text back into a specific control. And we have a set of controls here to play with those different commands. So we set some options and it will actually construct the command for us, and then go ahead and run it, and we'll see how it affects this web page. So let's start by, we want to use a command to click by ID, and the actual identifier is my checkbox 1. And if we click this button, it's going to use those settings to actually construct the command for us and go ahead and run the command so we see it take place. So if we click there, we see the actual command that's used to click the checkbox based on a specific value in the ID field. And here we can see the checkbox has been set. If we want to set the second checkbox, we look for the source code. We see it also has an ID. In this case, it's my checkbox 2. And so we go back, we do the click command with ID my checkbox 2, and go ahead and create and run the command. And now we see the checkbox was set. Now we want to set checkbox 3, but when we look at the source code for checkbox 3, we find it does not have an ID field. We do see a name field, however, called checkbox 3. The difference with name fields are they're not necessarily unique. There could be multiple name fields on the same web page with that same name value. So to identify a specific control with that named value, we also have to give it the occurrence within the page. And we can see that this is the first field called name on this page. So we'll give an occurrence of 1 in our command. So let's construct our command. We're going to go by name. We're going to go checkbox 3 and occurrence 1. Let's construct and run the command. And we see the checkbox was set. And here's the actual command. The command was about the same. We identified our browser window, and we're going to affect the control based on the name field with a value of checkbox 3, the first occurrence on this web page. If we want to set checkbox 4, we examine the source. We find out it does not have a unique ID field or a name field. However, it does have a class field, and we see the value is class checkbox 4. Class is also not necessarily unique on the web page, so we're going to need an occurrence number to uniquely identify that control. So let's go back to our application, and we're going to do a click by class, and the name of our class is class checkbox 4 with occurrence 1. So let's construct and run the command, and we see the checkbox was set, and here's the command used to do that. Now let's play with these radio buttons. We see the source code for radio button 1, and we notice it has an ID field of my radio 1. And the second radio button also has an ID field of my radio 2. So if we go back to our application, we want to click based on ID my radio 1, and construct and run the command. We've set the first radio button. Now let's toggle to the second radio button. Let's change the selected item in this pop-up menu. We see the source code. We can identify this control with ID my select 1, and we're going to change its value to blue. To do that, we're going to use the write command by ID, and we're going to change the identifier to my select 1, and the value we're going to set to blue. So let's go ahead and construct and run the command. We see the pop-up menu has been switched to blue, and here's the command that we constructed to accomplish that. We have a URL write, window write command, identifying the browser window by reference type ID, and here's the name of the ID field and the value that we want to write. Now let's click this button to perform some kind of action. We see the source code. It has an ID field of my button 1. So we're going to click by ID, my button 1, and we're going to construct and run the command. We see the button was clicked and it put up a message here in our page indicating that the action was performed. There's our command. Let's put some text into this edit field. We find the source code. It has an ID of my text 1. So we're going to write ID my text 1, and we'll write the name John into that field. Construct and run the command. We see the text was placed in the field. Here was the command used to do it. You can use the clipboard to copy and paste text between fields. First, let's look at the source of our two controls. We want to copy from this field, represented in the source code here. It says input with ID my text 1, and we want to paste it to this field, which is a text area field with ID my text area 1. We have a button in our sheet that runs a script command that presents the clipboard, and we'll be using that in just a moment. So for the first command, we want to copy based on ID my text 1, and we're going to construct and run the command. So we've copied this text into the clipboard. We can view it, and there we see the text that's in the clipboard. Now we want to do a paste, and we're going to do a my text area 1, and we'll construct and run the command, and here we see the command has taken place, and there's the actual command that was constructed to do that. Sometimes you'll encounter a web page that hasn't assigned an ID, a name, or a class attribute to its controls. You can still access those controls through a script command, but it's a little more difficult. We can use the actual tag of the control of what occurs within the page. So for example, let's say we wanted to click on this link, Apple, and we identify in the code that it's this tag. It's an A tag. It's actually the third occurrence of an A tag in this page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a click by tag, and the identifier is going to be A tag, third occurrence. And if we construct and run the command, we should then navigate to that page. And there we see we have navigated to the page for that link. To summarize, using simple script commands, ExcelRT can interact with any page on the internet, enter data, copy data from the page, or navigate through the different controls of the page.